So, Spider-Man No Way Home really surprised me. Going into the movie, I was really petrified because I wasn't a fan of the writers of the previous movie, and this seemed way too overstuffed to be a cohesive film that's focused on MCU Peter Parker. I mean, his identity gets revealed, we have Matt Murdock as Peter's lawyer, Doctor Strange casting spells, every single main villain from previous Spider-Man movies, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, and then the rest of the main cast from the previous movies. How on earth were they possibly going to balance all that in a way that felt cohesive and not fanservice-y? All I really wanted was a low-key Spider-Man movie that was focused on his identity crisis storyline, and this movie seemed to be going the opposite direction. But then I saw it, and wow, it was actually really good. Yeah, sure, it can be a little messy at times, but I just want to focus on how the creative team brilliantly did the impossible in this film. But before I elaborate on all those thoughts, I just want to say that if you guys enjoyed today's video, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, and follow my social media to stay updated with my content. Alright, let's get into it. Spider-Man No Way Home. Brilliant, but no, not lazy, messy. Just a little bit though. So real quick, I want to delve into the messy stuff. The first thing being Act 1. Act 1 is kinda jarring. Peter gets his identity revealed, he's facing prison, then gets cleared of the charges, then he's worrying about getting into college, then he gets rejected, then Doctor Strange casts a spell to make everyone forget that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, then the spell fails, then Peter tries to convince an MIT worker to reconsider their decisions, then the multiverse breaks out. It's just one thing after the other constantly, and the movie keeps this rapid pace despite the fact that I'm still processing the previous thing that just happened. But as soon as the main plot is established, it's mostly pretty smooth from there. My next complaint. I think the villains needed more screen time. Let's start with Lizard. Lizard directly ties in with one of the main themes of how doing good things can sometimes have adverse consequences. He has a line or two in the movie where he warns Peter of this, and I wanted more of that, at least in Act 2, because he could have had more of an interesting role and an actual character arc, because he could see that Peter accomplished his mission of actually doing good things for people and how it worked out in the end. Sandman I don't mind too much, and I think he was handled pretty well. The only thing I wanted more from him is just a simple monologue about how maybe his sand disease thing progressively became chronic and more permanent, and how he eventually just started to become complacent with it just as long as he was able to spend time with his daughter. Because I get that his motivation is that he simply wants to go home and that he could take it or leave it depending on whether or not he's rehabilitated. Doc Ock I honestly think was done perfectly. We didn't need to explore too much into him, and it was vastly fulfilling seeing him go from really angry and spiteful to being level-headed. His character was really important in making the viewer understand Peter's mission and why it's important for him to rehabilitate them. The expressions Alfred Molina displays in Doc Ock gives the character so much life, so much so that you want to see the rest of the villains rehabilitated. Electro principally had everything I wanted. Really, he's just a normal dude that has bad self-esteem issues. And here on this earth, he actually has a body that he likes at that, and he has a better grasp on his powers. He doesn't want to leave, and he doesn't want to be cured. It's completely understandable, but I just wish we fleshed him out more. For example, watching him talk to Andrew about how he's a nobody got me so into his character, and it was done in such a short amount of time too. I also like how Andrew ended up curing him. You could tell his character genuinely cared about Max and wanted to cure him, so it was gratifying to finally see that happen. Lastly, Green Goblin. Okay, look. He's practically perfect in this film, and I'll talk about him a lot more later. But again, the only issue is that I wanted more from him, like just a bit more screen time to flesh him out would have been nice. The other thing I wish was more fleshed out was that of Aunt May. I can't say I cared a whole lot about her character, unfortunately. Like, her grave is the same from Spider-Man PS4 where it says, if you help someone, you help everyone. But we really haven't seen her help anybody in these three movies. Like, she does stuff like handing out checks in Far From Home, but we don't get a personal view of her helping anyone or why it's so important to her. I mostly blame this on Far From Home for vastly underdeveloping her character, because I just wish I could feel more when she died. Conceptually, having the Uncle Ben figure die after 3 movies of development instead of the first 20 to 30 minutes is actually pretty genius. This way we get more emotionally attached to the character, so it's more hard-hitting and impactful when we get the "with great power comes great responsibility" line. I just feel like there was a lot left on the table for her character, and it just sucks that it couldn't get fleshed out in these 3 movies. My last complaint, and this one's kinda whatever, is the CGI. The movie wrapped in like March of 2021, so honestly it's phenomenal that it looks as good as it does. I don't want to rag on the CG artists because they did such a good job with such a short amount of time, but I can't help but say that a lot of the green screen and CGI just did not look very good. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the good. And there's a lot of it. The first notable difference is that the filmmaking and how the creatives behind the project have massively improved. No Way Home's direction is noticeably better as we see a lot more creativity in the camera work, the color grading is a lot more saturated, the art direction is a lot better, and is overall just a lot more ambitious of a film. For example, we get a pretty cool one-take scene that takes place in Peter's apartment, which is something I don't think they would have attempted in the past. And one of my favorites is the portrayal of Peter's spider sense. The scene in Happy's apartment was really cool because normally his spider sense reacts to quick things coming at him, but since the goblin was pretending to be Norman, it just took him a second to realize what was wrong. The scene is directed with a close-up on Peter with the camera slowly following him in a somewhat downward angle. It feels incredibly claustrophobic, mysterious, intense, and I really like how Jon Watts decided to portray that. The action is also pretty outstanding. The apartment scene where Peter is fighting Goblin is some of my favorite stuff in the MCU because it feels so desperate, brutal, and real. This is aided by the fact that a lot of the stunts and sequences here are done practically, which isn't something I think happens a lot. But the scene where Peter is pounding Goblin's head in while he's just maniacally laughing at him is probably one of my favorite things in the MCU now. It just goes so hard. Next, the writing. It feels pretty much impossible to balance all the things here, but the writers did it. There are so many meaningful and impactful scenes, the pacing is great, they never overdo it with the fan service, and the movie flows incredibly well with all the things it has to juggle. For example, it could have easily overdone it on the Doctor Strange magic and the multiverse concepts, but it somehow maintains its grounded feel and focuses the story so that it's more intimate. And one of my main complaints at Far From Home was that the humor was really on the nose and kinda cringe, but in No Way Home it felt pretty organic. It managed to mature the writing whilst maintaining the awkward teen comedy from the previous two movies, which I think is a really hard thing to get right. I also loved how they wrote Green Goblin. Again, a lot of these villains I had a concern that they would butcher them in some form just so they can elicit an easy nostalgic reaction from us. And also because they don't really have a personal connection with Peter, so I was curious to see what they would do with them, but they actually expanded and maybe even improved on the Green Goblin from Sam Raimi's films. Norman Osborn was portrayed as a stone-cold father and scientist, and Raimi left it pretty ambiguous whether or not his negative traits were from Norman or if it was the Goblin. Here, it's pretty clear that Norman is simply a man who's lost complete control of his mind and body. He's an innocent soul that's been trapped by a monster, and Willem Dafoe absolutely kills that. But Goblin, man, he's made so much more terrifying in this film, with his motives being a lot more ever-present. He's basically trying to prove his philosophy of life in this movie, this being that morality is a genuine weakness. He's absolutely repulsed by Aunt May and how she always wants to help people, and it kinda actually feels like he genuinely wants to help Peter because he sees how much potential he has to be strong, yet he's constantly being held back by feeling sorry for other people. He's on a mission to manipulate Peter into killing people, finally seeing that it's much easier to throw your morals away to get what you want. And in a sense, he's kind of right. Had Peter just sent them back to die, none of this would have happened.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
However, Peter proves that what he did wasn't a weakness. Morality and being selfless is tough, and it's especially tough when you're trying to help people who've directly hurt you. The whole film is a test of Peter's selflessness, his responsibility. Peter loses his Aunt May as a direct consequence to his own actions, which is something that made me so happy. I've been longing to have Peter face really traumatizing consequences due to his own actions in these films, and this definitely made up for it. In fact, the way Peter's written throughout the whole movie is great. Another thing, and it's a small thing, but I really like the part where Peter defeats Strange by doing a math equation. Like, we really don't see Peter being smart in his movies too much, so that was really refreshing to me. But mainly it's the fact that throughout the whole movie, Peter is struggling to give in to his selfless desires, but he rejects them in favor of a greater responsibility. He could kill Goblin, but doesn't. He could let these villains die and leave, but doesn't. He could retell his best friends that he's Spider-Man and get back to his life, but doesn't. It's so perfect. Next, I just want to quickly talk about those cameos. I absolutely adored Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man in this movie, and maybe a hot take, but he's always been my favorite actor to portray the role. He just embodies the physicality and cadence of Spider-Man so well, and I kind of forgot how much I missed his interpretation. I love that we get a lot of implied backstory of how he stopped pulling his punches and became rageful, and it kind of makes me want to see more of that. I also like that he's a lot more insecure about himself, especially when compared to the other two. And just little scenes of him smirking about how he's always wanted brothers brings me so much joy. Next, Tobey Maguire, and obviously, he's freaking great. He brings a lot of that reservedness in Peter, and it's cool seeing a more mature Peter that feels like he's got more of his life figured out. He actually brings something to the table from a narrative standpoint. He knows who MCU Peter is at his core since they're variants of each other, so it makes sense that he's able to help MCU Peter during this dark spell in his life. And lastly, the ending. The ending made me so overjoyed. Peter Parker is stripped away from literally everything in his life, and he still chooses to persevere despite all the hardships. That's what the character is all about. That's what Spider-Man means to me. I didn't feel that a whole lot in the previous two films, and this more than made up for it. He loses his Aunt May, he loses his best friend, his girlfriend, Happy, and he's left with absolutely no one. He could choose to try to have a happy life by convincing them of what happened, but he sees MJ's cut from the Statue of Liberty, and Peter realizes that he's better off not being in their lives. He sees that they're both happy, and he chooses to leave them like that. It's kinda beautiful. We end the movie with Peter broke, depressed, all alone, living in a really crappy apartment, and using a sewing kit and a simple police scanner to do his crime fighting as Spider-Man. And I couldn't be happier. It literally fixed any type of issue I might have had with this MCU Peter Parker, and I just can't believe that this movie is real. It made me fall in love with the character all over again, reminding me why he means so much to me. Spider-Man No Way Home isn't great because of the return of Willem Dafoe, Tobey Maguire, Andrew Garfield, or even my boy Matt Murdock, but because it did the impossible of balancing all the fan service to fit the narrative, improving heavily on the filmmaking, the writing, as many of the side characters actually had arcs, the humor was much more subtle, the antagonist felt personal, and most importantly, it understood what it means to be Spider-Man. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and let me know what you guys thought of Spider-Man No Way Home. Do you agree with my points? Disagree? Do you have something else to add on? Whatever you thought, let me know down in the comments. Also, how would you guys rate it? Me personally, I'd rate it an 8 out of 10, and it's pretty high up there in my Spider-Man ranking. And if you enjoyed, please remember to leave a like and subscribe, but with all that being said, I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.